Hello and welcome to the Meet the Parents podcast.
Hello and welcome to episode 9 of the Meet the Parents podcast. Each week we bring you half an hour of real parents and real stories from our panel of mums and dads. Joining me tonight are Mark and Vicky. Good evening.
Hi Tim.
Hello!
So on this week's show we're going to talk about writing about our kids, and Mark's had recent experience of talking about this with his son Ben, and also get an update on Vicky's conception journey, which we first talked about back in episode 4. In previous episodes, we've talked about why we blog about our families and the need to take care of our kids' digital footprints and identities. But what's it like on the other side of the fence? What's it like to be a child who's grown up over a period of years with your growing pains and drunken antics laid bare to the world? Well, that was exactly the topic of a talk given by Mark and his son Ben, who's, how old's Ben now?
He's 17 and he was 4 years old when I started writing.
So yeah, Mark and Ben did a speaking engagement recently. Now, we talked about the origins of your blog previously, but just give anyone who isn't familiar with the history a brief overview of how it all came to be and how it subsequently evolved.
In the spring of 2003, I went along to a meeting of the local writers' circle. The speaker was the editor of the local paper who said, "We'd quite like a humorous weekly column if somebody can do one." And I thought, well, blimey, I can do that. You know, how many times have I thought I ought to be writing about what my children have done? I picked out a particular incident, which was when my eldest son, who'd been 4 at the time, had been playing with his Lego. He'd sniffed a piece of Lego up his nose, and we'd had to take him to A&E to have it removed. And that was the inspiration for the very first one. Sent it into the paper, they liked it. The editor said to me, if you can keep it going for 6 weeks, you can probably do it for a while. And 13 years, 650 weekly columns, and approaching half a million words later, here I am.
And still no signs of parole for good behaviour.
No, absolutely. But perhaps signs of parole on the horizon, because come October of next year, Ben will be off to university, and no children at home means a slight lack of material.
So tell us more about this engagement that you and Ben have recently done. So what was it, and how did it come about?
Okay, so he's done public speaking through school with some success. He's got to national finals a couple of times. So he's a pretty competent public speaker. In fact, he's really quite good, said his father, thinking, was the boy better than me? I knew somebody who wanted a financial services company, and I knew they wanted a client evening, and they wanted about 50 or 60 clients entertaining. So that seemed like a really good opportunity to test drive this father-son public speaking gig. So that's what we did, and it went really, really well. I spoke for about 25 minutes on writing about my children and how my approach changed as my children got older, and related it to the various problems of being a dad. Ben spoke about what it was like to grow up being written about, and what we tried to do was mix in the humour of family life with some really quite deep observations as well. So, you know, we talked about Speedy the dead goldfish, but I also talked about how writing about my children had given me much more of an insight into my relationship with my own father, and it was a really, really successful evening.
Okay, so could you maybe tell us a little bit more about one or two of the key topics or stories that you covered during your talk?
Yeah, sure. I mean, going through my speech, I started off with how I started writing, how I went through my first crisis when one newspaper editor decided he didn't want me anymore. He wanted pictures of naked girls on nights out. At the time that I started writing, I've still worked in financial services, but always with this small voice inside me saying, let me out, I want to be a writer. So I talked about the family event which precipitated me selling the business and writing full time. Talked about creating characters, how your own children become characters. Talked about changes that they've gone through over the 13 years and how I've managed to write about them all. Talked about some particular incidents. Made the point, I think, that it's very important that you draw a very strict line, that there are certain things that you will write about and certain things that you won't write about. I talked about my own dad, how as I say, how writing about my children altered my perception of my dad. And then I finished off by talking about how I hoped that the children would value what I'd written when they become parents of their own.
And were there people in the audience who knew you and Ben and the family in real life?
Yes, there were. There were about, out of an audience of 50 or 60, there were probably half a dozen people who know us in real life, yes. So, I did, in the presentations, use my children's real names, which of course I don't do on the blog. So that rather blurred the protecting the children's identity a little bit, if you like. But, Ben, as he is on the blog, is 17 now. I discuss what I write with him every week. So that, I think, has become slightly less important.
So tell us a little bit more about how Ben perceives it. So from his perspective, how does it feel for him to have been written about for so much of his life?
Okay, so I think it's interesting looking at it from your child's perspective. I mean, when your child is 5 or 6, that they don't know what you're doing and they don't have an opinion. When they're 14 or 15, they emphatically do know what you're doing and they very much have an opinion. So you do, as the writer, you have to tread very carefully. Ben is, of my 3 children, I think it's fair to say that Ben is the one with the most emotional intelligence. So he's got a really good insight into what I do and why I do it and why it's important to me. But he talked about how his attitude has changed as he's got older, how we now discuss what's written rather than me simply writing and saying, oh, well, the kids are only 5 years old, they don't know what I'm writing, so it doesn't matter. Because when they're 15, it emphatically does matter because they do know what you're writing and they read it and their friends read it as well.
So at what age was he first aware that you were writing about him?
5, 6, something like that.
So quite early, and presumably then his perspective has evolved and changed quite a lot over the 11, 12 years.
When he was 6, we had a little incident at the airport when he got arrested. He was acutely conscious that his father's first reaction was to whip his notebook out and start making notes. He's aware now of when I let situations in the house develop because I'm getting material for the blog. We had an incident about, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, when one of the cats brought a mouse in and the mouse was jogging round and round the dining room and Ben and I were tasked with catching it. And he said to me, "You've no interest in catching this mouse at the moment, have you? You want to get enough material for a blog before you start worrying about catching the mouse." And he was absolutely right.
Were there any particularly interesting questions that came up from the audience?
There were a couple, really. One was, somebody asked me, did I think my father would have written about me? To which my answer was, no, my dad wouldn't have written about me, because my dad, he came from a generation that wasn't comfortable expressing their feelings. I think it's fair to say that I probably never ever had a meaningful conversation with my father. So would he ever have written about me? No, he wouldn't, because he didn't do that sort of thing. His generation didn't do that sort of thing. Interestingly, I answered half that question and Ben answered the other half of it. And he said that he would emphatically write about his children when he had them, because he's realised now how valuable and unique a record of his own childhood my blog is. And that's the first time he said that, and I was reaching for the Kleenex when he said that, that he realised that writing about your children, it just ultimately presents them, gives them just a fantastic gift, a fantastic record of their own childhood. So I thought that was a really, really quite interesting question, and the way the answers to that question developed surprised me.
And that's a really fascinating insight, because I think so many of us as parents write our blogs to try and capture that record of our children growing up. And, certainly I wonder, will they ever actually get to read any of that? Will they appreciate what a valuable record of their early years it is?
Let me tell you, and Vicky, I think your daughter's about 8 or 9, is she?
Yeah, she's 9.
Yeah. Let me tell you, just emphatically, to keep writing, because they do come to appreciate it when they are older. You're going to go through difficult times when they are teenagers, and there's going to be a lot of stuff that you can't write about. One of the points that I made quite forcefully is that when you think about family life, your first thoughts are the big events like Christmas and birthdays and sports days, nativity plays and all that sort of thing. But if you're producing content regularly, like parent bloggers do, that there aren't enough big events, and that forces you in many ways to write about trivia. But I think that's really important, because actually, if you think about family life, the big events are just highlights. Family life is really made up of a series of trivial events. And I think that's what writing allows you to do. Blogging gives the parent a unique gift if they do but realise it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, Grace was, 5 when I started my blog. And, I was capturing a lot of what she said as a youngster. And those memories now are so precious to me that I've recorded them and I have them to look back on. And as the years have gone by, I've sort of evolved in the way I write about her. And I'll still share photographs, but I don't do the embarrassing stuff. And I'm much more aware now of what she does and doesn't want me to do. But she knows that my blog is just a natural part of what I do. She completely accepts it.
I have to write I'm sure you do, Tim. I have to write in the same way that I have to breathe and I have to drink water. It's just what I do. I did write about the first time my eldest son came home drunk, because that was really, really funny. Didn't write about the first time my daughter got drunk, because that was a horrendous experience. Just horrendous. And that story will never, ever, ever see the light of day.
And similarly, Vicky, I mean, are there certain topics about Grace that are similarly off limits for you?
There will be. I mean, I think at the moment she's still young enough for me to... There's nothing majorly personal, no boyfriends, no periods or anything like that. But I have written a post about how we explain puberty to her. But I didn't think that was encroaching on her space, because I was talking about and the way we explained it and how we've done it and how grown up she was about it all. And I just wrote that so that people could see the way we'd explained it to her. And I think it was quite natural in the way it was discussed. And it also means that it'll help other people see that we have discussed it with a 9-year-old. I think quite a lot of people found the post quite useful.
Yeah, and you mentioned that Grace is already aware that you write about her on the blog. So how long has that been the case?
She's always known. And in fact, at first, when she first started to realise what I was doing, we were making things together, entering some of the competitions that, you had to make we designed the first thing she remembers us doing was designing a water park ride when we entered the TOTS competition to become a Centre Parks blogger. And she hasn't forgotten it. She helped design it. And she still remembers it now. And she used to call it my bog.
Yeah, and that's just interesting, because with us, Isaac he's only relatively recently become aware of the fact that I write about him. So this is from about age 7, and I've shared some of the stuff I've written about him, got his opinion on it, got his feedback, and it's fueled an interest in writing his own blog now. So last summer I set him up with his own private blog on WordPress that he can experiment with and play with, and he dips in and out of it. He has a liking for working with the written word. I have no idea where he's got that from.
Yeah, Grace had her own blog for a while, but it was myself and another blogger who were writing it, and it sort of just sits there at the moment with nothing going on. And eventually, if she wants to take it back up again, she can. She's also got her own YouTube channel, which doesn't have much on it right now, but she's keen to sort of do videos.
You've just got to keep talking to your children. That's a fundamental of parenting, in my view, anyway. You've got to keep talking to them, because if you can't talk to them when they're 6, you've no chance at all of talking to them when they're 16. You've got to discuss it with them. You've got to say, look, I've written this. What do you think of it? And if you're unhappy with it, or if there's things there that you don't like, then I promise you, I'm going to take them out.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. I think that dialogue's really important, and also not just to get a view in terms of what they think about it today, but to, and you've talked about this before as well, Mark, anticipating how they might feel about things in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've always been quite careful about what I talk about regarding my kids on the blog. I'm quite happy to acknowledge that family life isn't perfect, but I don't go into great detail about it. And I think at all times I try to think about whether today's amusing anecdote is the sort of thing that might embarrass them when they hit their teens. So there you have it. Writing about your kids. It's a ticking time bomb. If you hear an explosion, you'll know that it's probably one of our kids exercising extreme retaliation against their parental biographers.
It's the reality TV show the BBC should never have made. The girl in the short skirt who feels the need to kiss everyone. The hard-up family forced to sleep 10 to a single bedroom. The out-of-control airship where passengers are flung all over the cabin without anyone asking them to fasten their seatbelts. It's a world filled with more dubious characters than Benefit Street. Welcome to the Night Garden. This show is suitable for children aged 1 to 6.
You may remember a few episodes back, Vicky talked candidly about the journey that she and Ross and Grace are currently going through to conceive a child. Now, when we last left off back in episode 4, Vicky, you and Ross were just about to set off to Cyprus to embark on the egg donation process. So talk us through what's happened since then, because it's been a bit of a roller coaster ride.
It certainly has, yeah. Much more than we anticipated it would be, actually. So we tootled off to Cyprus. We arrived there on Tuesday, the 1st of March, and not knowing what was going to happen that evening, Ross decided to propose to me. So that was a lovely shock. The post about how he proposed to me is on my blog, but we arrived at our accommodation in the evening. We got shown to our apartment and we were told our meal was ready. And we went off to the restaurant, and Ross decided he wanted to nip back and go to the loo. But actually, he was ringing my mum to ask for her blessing. And
how lovely!
Yeah,
what a wonderful man! I just so approve of that.
He's been so wonderful throughout this whole process. As I said on one of my posts, I've never known kindness like it. He's so good. He came back and said to me, "Come outside, have a look at this," and he was trying to show me around the apartments and show me the grounds, and he said, "Look, this is lovely." And then we got back to our apartment, he said, "Oh, this will have to do," because he was trying to find somewhere higher up to go and do it. He was trying to get up onto the top balcony, it was closed off. And he got down on one knee and just said, "Will you marry me?" and held out my ring. And I had no clue he was going to do this. And actually that morning we had been discussing the fact the day before had been leap year day, and his parents apparently had said, "Oh, don't you think Vicky will propose to you?" He went, "No." And I said to him, "No, you're right." I said, "I don't, that's your job." So yeah, it was a real shock, and I was very happy. He kept saying to me, "You can change the ring if you like." I said, "No, you chose it." So why would I do that? But so that was lovely, and it was a lovely start to the whole process. The following day, we went to the clinic, and they wanted to we thought that Ross was going to have to do his side of the bargain that day. You can imagine what that means. it didn't happen that way. They decided that because our donor was a day behind, they wanted to just check me, make sure that I didn't have anything going on inside my womb. They wanted to just scan me. They had to give me an injection because I had one follicle developing, and they wanted to just get rid of it so it didn't interfere with anything. And then they had decided that the embryo transfer would actually be on the day we were supposed to fly back in the evening. So it was all a bit sort of last minute. So the following day we went back again when Ross had to do his side of things, and then they fertilised the embryos, and each day they sent us a photograph of the developing embryos, giving us an update and telling us what was happening. In the meantime, we had time just to relax, and I have to say I've never slept so much in my life. And then the 2 days before we were due to go back to the clinic, it was really sunny, so we managed to sit outside and just relax and sunbathe. And then the day of the transfer, I was really nervous, probably understandably. I had to drink a lot of water because they needed to scan my womb so they knew where to place the embryos. When we got to the clinic, they told us that the embryos hadn't developed as much as they hoped they would. They were a day behind. They grade them. So the embryos are A grade, so they're forming into blastocysts, or they're BA, so they're just below that, or they're BBs. And we had 8 fertilised. 2 had chromosomal problems, so they died off. And then they decided, because none of the embryos were as strong as they hoped, they would put 4 into me, which was a bit of a shock. It was 2 boys and 2 girls. They're allowed to tell us the gender in Cyprus. So they said there would be a 1% chance of quads, and we said we just want 1. We're not, we don't mind whatever happens. We would be happy with 1. So they did the transfer. I had to lay down for at least 2 hours afterwards, and they decided to come and give me a couple of injections. The medication that you have to do is immense. We had a whole list of different medication and different times of the day that I had to do it, and we went over it and double checked it. Ross wouldn't let me get out of bed for longer than 2 hours. He said, no, stay there for 4, it's fine. And then they brought us back to the airport, and Ross was just brilliant. He didn't let me carry anything, touch anything. He went to the airline staff and said, can you let my fiancée on, please, with the disabled passengers? I don't want her getting knocked. And they allowed that. And then we got back really late in the evening, so we stayed in a hotel up at Gatwick before travelling back to Somerset the next day. After that, it was a series of 8 alarms a day, constant medication. Ross was getting really good at injecting the fraxaparine into my stomach. That was to stop miscarriages. That's a blood thinner. And then every 4 or 5 days, I also had another injection, and that's to help boost the progesterone. And that hurts. It's in your backside, and it hurts. We knew we could have tested on the 20th of March, but that was a Sunday. So we had made an appointment with the doctors to go for our test on the Monday morning. And we had a blood test. It was an HCG test. The next day we knew the results were due. And I rang the doctor's surgery a couple of times because we hadn't heard anything. And the first time the receptionist told me that she needed the doctor to make comments. So we did wonder whether something was going on. And she said, I can't read it. I don't know what the result is. So then the doctor rang us in the afternoon and told us that the levels were less than 1. And to say that we were pregnant, it would need to be over 5. So at this stage, we were really shocked and really upset. And I have to say, my body had been displaying all the symptoms of being pregnant. I had, my boobs hurt. I had sleep. I slept loads. I was really tired. I also had cramping on the Wednesday after we got back, and they said that sounded like it was an implantation cramp. So we were fully expecting good news, especially with the amount of embryos that we'd had, and it was completely the opposite. And I have to say that it felt as bad, if not worse, than having a miscarriage, which I've already had 2 of. And that is because we'd also paid a lot of money. And it's not about the money, it's about what we want. But it was really hard because we had such positive feelings about everything working this time, and it hadn't.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously you've been through an incredibly traumatic roller coaster where you've had the high of Ross proposing to you and then the low of what you've just described. But how has Ross coped with it?
Yeah, a lot of people forget about the men in this situation, and he has been just as devastated as me, and he's been very sad, very angry, and he's found it very difficult. We've both tried our best to support each other. It's very difficult when you're both going through emotions, and different emotions at different times, actually. Some days I'm sort of behind him, sometimes he's behind me, and it's just been up and down, and we've both, there's been bickering, but not to any great extent, and it's understandable when you're sort of both feeling a lot of emotions going around your body. Obviously, I've also had to cope with the hormones and trying to deal with all that, but I stopped it as soon as we knew we could stop as soon as we found out. The good thing is that the clinic said to us that they were concerned about this, and they took another sample from Ross before we left.